Well, Cody is a licensed massage therapist, reflexologist, and registered yoga teacher. But more importantly, on the non-professional level, he is a space cadet, seeking to do space cadet things. Consequently, he likes speaking and writing about inner space and how we can access that final frontier of limitless consciousness. As Buzz Lightyear once said, to infinity and beyond. There you go.
All right. I'm actually going to use the board because I don't have any other notes. So I'm going to do a little structure here using the board. I'm going to do a little timeline. So we'll do this. 2006 DMT. So I wasn't going to talk about this, but since you talked about ayahuasca, I'm like, oh, I got to talk about that. So I'll explain. All right, 2006 DMT, 2010 Kundalini. All right, I'm going to pause here. Kundalini, who knows what this word means? Raise your hand. Okay, interesting. People are like shaking their hand. Okay, everyone's shaking their hand. Cool. So I'm gonna elaborate on this. This is a very important part of the story. Who is, out of curiosity, who has never heard of this word, Kundalini? Oh wow. Yes. So this will be a new thing, but I'm gonna tie it into actually Christianity and a word that I know all of you know. Everybody's heard the word Holy Spirit, yes? Yes. So this is related to that. It's a bit different. And actually, let me say a little bit more of this. Actually, it's a Sanskrit word, and it literally translates to snake. So it's relevant, very relevant, related to the more shamanic stuff. And I'm gonna talk about, when I get into the story of my Kundalini experience, what that snake means. Again, it's not something demonic or dark. It's quite the opposite. It's more of a kind of a structural thing in terms of a spiral and the way the energy works. But I'll get back to that. Then we got 2017 France. I went to France. I went to France to get certified in yoga, and this led to this. So in between here is a lot leading to this, which in turn is leading to this. Yogani is a person, and this is a person who I met in 2018, and that will be the culmination of these other things. So let's see. I guess I'll assume the seat again. And I have to really time myself because this is all autobiographical, whereas the other three have done more kind of academic or other people's story. This is all my story. Partially, I think I'm narcissistic, so I like to tell my story. And also, just to be transparent, I've spent a lot of time in AA, Alcoholics Anonymous, actually beginning back in 2010. And if you've ever been to an AA meeting, it's unlike any other social group I've ever been in. And firstly, I'm kind of breaking the rules by saying I'm part of, hence the anonymity, but I certainly want to respect anyone else who's in AA, and I would never mention their name, but for me, it's important in the story. But in AA, you can literally just spill your guts, and tell everything that's in the closet that's typically hidden. So it's remarkable in that sense. It creates a space where people can again share, details that have typically been shoved down or away and repressed and suppressed. So very thankful for having that experience. And again, I've spoken in other public settings. I'm part of a networking group, and I have to speak in front of a lot of people on a regular basis. So I'm comfortable kind of sharing some of my personal details. And hopefully that it will be entertaining and not too nauseating, but we'll see. So, DMT. Anna, right? Okay. Anna was talking about ayahuasca, the plant that grows in South America. So DMT is essentially the primary molecule or ingredient in that plant that makes it hallucinogenic, right? DMT stands for dimethyltryptamine. It's also produced by our own body in the brain. I think the pineal gland or something like that. I'm sorry. Oh yeah,
when you dream.
When you dream, so, exactly. So it's very active during times of dreaming. They also know it's released at the moment of death. Very significant. Let's talk about Michael Harner having this little death. It's all related to mystical states and states of transition, transformation. On that note, if you want to ask questions or throw in things like that, please do. So I just want to put that out there because we're not having like a Q&A, are we?
No.
Okay. So feel free to interrupt me with questions, statements, objections, etc. So DMT. I just want to mention this real quick. I'm just tangential and all over the place, but Matthew right there held an event. When was that? About a month ago, Matthew?
Yeah, probably. Yeah.
It was a spoken word event where we had like 10 authors, maybe even a little more.
Yeah, 11. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, 11. So read poetry and fiction, nonfiction. I had written a nonfiction piece about this experience, so I'm fresh off that. But again, I want to limit that because the other stuff is more important. But long story short, I had a neighbor where in my apartment where I was living, and I just graduated from Florida State. I had studied religious studies, primarily Buddhism, interestingly enough. So what you were reading has brought back so many memories and the depth of Buddhist thought and metaphysics. It's fascinating stuff. So I really appreciate that, man. And you really presented it well. So thank you. In any case, I had just graduated, having studied Buddhism, and I was really interested in mystical, transcendental states. So my neighbor is like, I was talking to him one day, he's like, well, I've made some DMT for my personal use. Would you like to try it? And I was like, I don't know, man. Because, I hadn't done, I had several years before that, 2000, like 99, 98, 2000, I had done LSD, mushrooms, peyote. And I had my share. I was burned out, as you do get when you do psychedelics, a little too much. So I was like, I don't know, man. I don't know if I want to do that. But I thought about it, and he didn't pressure me or anything. He's like, yeah, if you want to. So I was like, all right. Eventually, after kind of weeks of contemplation, it's like, all right, I want to do it. So he came over to my apartment, and it was in a powder form. Like, he had synthesized it in a powder form, and he put it in, are the children asleep? Okay. He put it in a bong, and he's like, all right, you take a hit. And he's like, I'm going to take the bong from your hand because you won't be able to set it down on your own. Like, all right, man. And so let me elaborate on why that is the case. So with ayahuasca, when you ingest it as like the plant juice or whatever, you drink it, it comes on gradually, like 20, 30 minutes, something like that. And then you slowly ascend to a peak after, 5-6 hours, and then you descend like this. Of course, the experience itself can be, like Michael Harner said, crazy and wild, but nevertheless, it's like it occurs over 8 hours, whatever. So when you smoke DMT, it hits you instantly. So I hit the bomb, and as I'm exhaling, sure enough, the wall starts melting, and geometric patterns just start spiraling at me. And I just remember like him taking the bong, and I'm just like, and he looks at me, and he's just, enjoy. That's all. And I couldn't speak or anything. And it was just so instantly overwhelming. I was like, oh man, I just had this intuitive sense, like, no control here. Just buckle in, I'm going somewhere. And sure enough, sure enough, I closed my eyes because I was so overwhelmed. I just couldn't kind of keep up with the sensory phenomena. Talk about the Buddhist cutting attachments. Like I couldn't keep up with all the sensory phenomena visually in particular. So I closed my eyes and I'm zooming out of my body, going, gone at this infinite speed, seemingly infinite speed. And I come to rest in another, dimension. And it was stunning. It was made like all of light. It was just this vast, heavenly light. And again, I could really talk a lot about it, but I'll just quickly say I saw two beings there, what's often called light beings. One was a male, and he was very human-like, so not like a gator or a reptilian. He was very human-like, but he was like the Buddha, he was floating in the space and with this just Buddha smile, and he was like pure peace, pure serenity. And he didn't look at me, but he was just kind of, I felt like he knew I was there type thing. And,
Sorry.
yeah, that's good. Laughter is good. And then I saw this female being, she was like stunning, and she was looking at me directly with her eyes. And that just totally annihilated me in a good way. It was just like pure love. I swear to God, it was just magnificent. And I just remember essentially being kind of locked in her gaze as she's literally floating in the air and just beaming love through her eyes. And I just remember being kind of locked in the gaze, and I just realized I can't stay here. I gotta go back. I can't stay here. And so I come back to the couch and where I was sitting, and I just opened my eyes and I looked around, and it felt like I'd been gone for weeks or maybe even months. So my sense of time and space was very warped. And this is very common with people that do DMT. They call it time dilation. So the sense of time changes radically. In any case, I could barely speak, and it rocked me, and I never did it again, because I just knew this is too good. This is like a cheat. This is I just knew I couldn't do it again. So that's the DMT story. From that time, I got married. I moved to San Francisco, and I was drinking a lot, kind of going to the bar. And long story short, I ended up getting a divorce. And at that point, I realized I gotta change things, And that's when I started going to AA, getting sober, and then that's when I started actively praying and meditating. In college, and when I was studying Buddhism and all that, I never was practicing. But once things started to fall apart for me, I was like, maybe I should actually try this stuff to try to live it, So I started praying, meditating. I was living in San Francisco, so I was hanging out with some more esoteric people, like a shamanic guy. A guy that was, another guy I was hanging out with who studied Kabbalah, like Jewish mysticism. And he taught me some cool little tricks to activate the third eye. Has everyone heard of the third eye? Okay, so it's here. It's the so-called center of intuition, the center of seeing beyond the normal sensory perception. So anyway, hanging out with these different people. I'm just looking at the time because I feel like I can go so long. What time should I end? Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
You're good, buddy.
All right. Cool. Okay. So I start kind of again. I'm going to AA. I'm praying. I'm meditating. I'm doing shamanic stuff. I'm just throwing myself fully towards some some contact with God or spirit or whatever, and it all culminated in a way in this experience I had where I was driving from Tampa to North Georgia, this little town in North Georgia called Clayton, where North Carolina, South Carolina, and Georgia meet. Anybody heard of that town? Yeah? All right, sweet. You ever been to the Dillard House?
Yeah.
Really? Oh, okay, great place. If you go to Clayton, go to the Dillard House. It's great Southern food. Anyway, so I'm driving from Tampa to Clayton. It's about a 9-hour drive, give or take. And for the first part of the trip, about 3-4 hours, I decided to turn the car into a sweat box because I wanted to sweat profusely. Again, I was into shamanic stuff and the ideas of purification. So I crank up the heat, lock the windows. It's already hot. I'm just like sweating my balls off for like 3 hours, and I'm like purifying emotions, etc. It's like catharsis, you know. And then I start to get near Atlanta, and I'm like, all right, I think I'm gonna pass out. I better pull over and cool off. So I did that, and so I get back in the car, and I'm like, all right, I turn on the air, and I enter a whole nother little stage within the drive. I'm just chilling. I'm driving. You know when you go on a drive, how you can like get in the zone? It can be soothing, you know. And even if you're not listening to music, right? And I wasn't listening to music at all. I was just driving, and I just feeling increasingly serene, just more and more. I'm like, man, I feel so good. And then suddenly, like, I got past Atlanta. I'm starting to get up into the mountains, and I'm still in that chill mode. And then I feel this sensation at the bottom of my spine, like right lower back. It's like this like tickling, like this pleasurable sensation. And it kind of prompts me to like sit up straighter, like, you know, I'd been like slumped or whatever. So I sit up straight, and as soon as I sat up straight, it was like a lightning bolt of energy hit me. So here's what happened. So I feel this surge of energy explode from my spine, start to radiate out my hands, my feet, my entire body. It feels like I'm glowing, you know, with this radiant energy. And then simultaneously, I start to see visions kind of being projected from my mind or third eye out the windshield as I'm driving. And I'm glad I did psychedelics because it kind of prepared me for this kind of thing, you know? But this was not a flashback. This was something different, but I would say related in terms of the realm of consciousness that I was getting the privilege to see. But so like I'm seeing this panorama of like just benevolent faces, and I honestly, it was happening in a flash, so I couldn't recognize who they were, but I just, again, knew they were benevolent people. And then I put some attention right above my head here, and I see this golden flower just like, again, in this light, right, just blooming above my head, right, on this subtle level of light, but incredibly lucid. Like, it's not like, I wasn't wondering like, is this real? It's like, if anything, it was to me hyper real, or realer than real, if that makes sense. So I'm tripping balls sober, not through drugs, and driving. And I'm like, what is happening? So it simmered. It started to simmer down. Like, I'm not seeing the visions. I'm not seeing the flower, and I'm back to like, oh, I can just see the road, and but the energy is there in my body in a way that's never been. It's like this light switch has been flipped, yeah. And I call my buddy in San Francisco, like, man, something's happening, man. He's like, just relax, you're having a Kundalini experience. So, Kundalini. What that means, and this is old school yoga, okay? Since Rachel billed me as the local yogi, I'm gonna tie it into that. So Kundalini means, as I said, snake or coiled snake, and it's this theory, and you can regard it as a theory. To me, it's a reality, that we all have this latent energy in our spine, and once it becomes activated, it kind of flowers and expands. So that's what Kundalini is. It's like the Holy Spirit too. Like, if you're touched by God or the Holy Spirit, you can feel it. It's palpable. It can give you, vistas of other dimensions, as Christian mystics have talked about and written about for centuries. So Kundalini is the yogic version of what I would say call the Holy Spirit. So that changed me. I was like, after that, I was like, I gotta find out more about Kundalini. So I started doing research on the internet, and I found this website called Advanced Yoga Practices. This website is still there. You can check it out. The creator of the website is an anonymous man who calls himself Yogani. Okay, so he created the website in 2005. I found it in 2010, so it was still quite new. And he created the website because he wanted to share knowledge and techniques related to yoga, meditation, Kundalini, etc. And I started reading his lessons. I was like, man, I like this language. This resonates with me. I started practicing some of his techniques were meditation, breathing, a certain kind of yoga prayer called samyama, which is essentially thinking positive thoughts and releasing them into consciousness. So I started practicing all this, and there's an online forum where people chat and share their experiences. So I get on the online forum, I start writing, and I love writing, so it's super easy for me. And I meet people through the forum, and then I end up meeting some of them in person. Again, so this is through the course of 2010 to 2017. I went to probably 5 advanced yoga practices retreats, or AYP for short, across the country, like one in Chicago, one in Detroit, one in California, several in Michigan. So I'm like immersing myself as much as possible into AYP, the community that's revolving around this website, which is revolving around this anonymous man who nobody knows what he looks like. Nevertheless, he's done some radio interviews, like some internet radio interviews, so you could hear his voice. And during this whole time, I've been emailing him. Like, he's open to receiving emails and stuff. So ultimately, there was a certification offered for AYP, Advanced Yoga Practices, in France, and I went over there. It was a month-long program. I took it. It was really good. It was a solid program, and I met. There's like 25 of us, and again, I could talk a lot about that, but I want to skip to meeting the anonymous guy. That's the crux of it. After the certification program, I was still left with many questions related to not only the techniques, but the implications of the techniques, and more specifically, the mystical states and things like that, right? Since I've had a taste of them both through psychedelics and both naturally, it's something that I continue to want to explore. So with Yogani, I emailed him and I was like, man, can we just meet for lunch? Please, I want to see you face to face type thing. And he's like, no, I'm sorry, can't do it. So I was like, all right. But I was so gnawed at internally, and that I was like, I'm just gonna go find him anyway, with benevolent intentions, right? Like, I didn't want to like hurt him or scare him, but I'm just gonna fucking knock on his door. And so I had a friend, she's a private detective. It's like, hey, can you find me and yeah, she got back with me in like 30 minutes. Like, yeah, here, this is who he is. I was like, well, that was easy. So I was like, all right. So I called one of my buddies who I'd met through the AYP network, my buddy Chaz. I love this guy. He's a pilot, and he's like the coolest guy. He's the chillest motherfucker you'll ever meet. Just nerves of steel. I've never seen him get ruffled. So it's like, hey bro, you're gonna come to Tampa. We're gonna drive to Jacksonville. That's where Yogani lives, and we're gonna go knock on his door. It's like, all right, that's good. Let's do it. So he flew into Tampa, and we drove up there. We get super close to his place, and I'm nervous. I'm like super nervous. Like, I don't know if we should do this, man. because naturally, like, it's against his preference or will. But nevertheless, like, in my heart, my conscience, like, no, this is the right move. This is it. This is the right move. So he's like, here, let's buy flowers. We'll bring him flowers. All right, so we saw him buy flowers, and we go to his door, and we're walking up the steps. It's like a condo on the second story. And again, I'm like, I don't know, Chaz. I don't know, buddy. I think we should turn back. He's like, forget about it. He just goes up, knocks on the door, no hesitation. So a man opens the door, friendly-looking man, smiling. He looks at me. He goes, "This better not be Cody." I was like, "Hey, what's up? Hello." And this awkward silence for like 5-10 seconds, just. But then we start talking. And he's like, "All right, you're here. I'll talk to you." So we had like a 15-minute conversation, and it was mostly friendly. And at the end, he's like, look, I'm sorry you traveled all this way. I'd invite you in, but I still want to be anonymous, So I hope you respect that. And so we're like, yeah, man, it's all good. We're just glad you opened the door. He's like, of course I opened the door. It's my house. So we literally shook hands, and he gave the flowers back to us. It was like a gesture, his whole motto is the guru is in you. You know what I mean? He doesn't want to be a guru, and I respect that. And I'm, to my core, I suppose, like an American individualist. I don't want anybody to be above me. And hence the narcissism I mentioned at the beginning too. But I just had to meet this guy, to look him in the eye, because he'd written about so many profound things. So consequently, after the meeting, there was a bit of a backlash with other members of the community and stuff. So I'm a bit on rocky ground with that. But I wouldn't have it any other way. I'm a truth seeker, and I have to see things. I have to live things. I have to touch things. To use a Christian illusion, I'm like the doubting Thomas. I want to fucking feel the wounds. So that's it. Oh man, I know I've probably gone way too long, but if you have any questions, find me after the meeting.